Sword-swallowing Saleyaporro has been announced, and your boy is a Star 2 character. A lot of us thought he was a Star 1 character given how complex he is, but honestly, I don't want to know what Tamsoft is cooking if this is a Star 2. I'm going to be breaking down everything about Saleyaporro in this video here, but first,
run that shit back!
The 8th Espada Saleyaporro Grants is a character who creates advantageous situations by retrieving the spirit bugs and analyzing the opponent. He plants the spirit bugs on the opponent with a specific attack, namely his Spiritual Pressure Technique 1, and retrieves them with his signature move. Retrieving the spirit bug affects damage taken, the number of souls destroyed by a Kikon move, and even the resurrection when souls reach 0, meaning his revival. Since he starts with a low number of souls and runs the risk of early defeat, if left as is, obtaining the resurrection effect is a lifeline. He is required to understand the strengthening rules of the spirit bug and to play in an endurance-oriented manner with the possibility of taking advantage of resurrections to win by decision in mind. His description is very verbose, but I'll be able to break it down once I explain all of his mechanisms here. To understand Saleyaporro, let me just explain this. Saleyaporro attacks his opponents by placing his spirit bugs on his opponents, he analyzes their spiritual pressure, and then he deals with them accordingly. Depending on where he is in his analyzation process, he'll need less bugs to understand the enemy. Once he understands them well enough, he'll be strong enough to revive, reduce the damage, and destroy them with stronger techniques. This is basically playing on the fact that they're basically in his lab. And anytime they're fighting with him, the longer they're in a battle, the longer he has the opportunity to understand them. To explain, first let's understand what it is that we have as a gauge. His gauge is called a Spiritual Pressure Understanding level. The gauge will fill up when the planted bugs are retrieved with the signature move or when the signature technique 2 is activated. As the gauge fills up, the Ryatsu reveal level will gradually increase, and we'll break down what that is later. There are 3 benefits to be gained by increasing the level. The damage taken will be reduced. After awakening, it will be easier to get results with a larger number of souls destroyed with Kikon moves, and after awakening, when the soul reaches 0, it will be revived with a soul of 3. It occurs up to 2 times depending on the level. Essentially what this is saying is that at all times, as long as you have some gauge filled up, the damage taken will be reduced. This is referencing reduce the damage, where he freaks out for a moment and is explaining his scientific methods. And so this is amazing. I think this is such an amazing lore accurate model for a character. They used a probability archetype to show how he can reduce the damage and at what rate. Now I'm going to break down the math of it all because there is a little bit of math involved, but before that, let's break down everything we have here. When we're looking at his attack, it is a 1. His speed and range are both 3. Durability is a 2 and technique is a 5. He is a ease of use 2 stars, meaning not the hardest but just about. When we look at his signature move, it is a grab on the opponent at close range and retrieves the planted spirit bugs. The number of spirit insects retrieved increases the analyst stage and the spiritual pressure understanding level. and the user gains a corresponding increase in ability. When we look at his spiritual pressure technique 1, die in a state close to perfection, Saleyaporro allows himself to go into a stance to where he is able to be attacked, and if he is hit, he will do a counterattack. It deals damage and collects the spiritual bug. With his spiritual technique 2, the gauge of your spiritual pressure understanding level is increased. It accumulates. The amount of gauge accumulation is affected by the analyst process stage. In your awakening, your performance is strengthened. The number of souls destroyed by your Kikon moves varies depending on the probability, and the higher the level of spiritual pressure understanding, the easier it will be to deal damage. Also, when the user's soul reaches 0, they can be revived with a soul of 3. The Rokorechu are a spirit bug that can be implanted into the enemy with a specific attack, being the spiritual pressure technique 1. The analysis progress stage is dependent on the number of spirit bugs that you have currently planted. As the stage progresses, the number of spirit bugs required to collect to accumulate the gauge for your spirit pressure understanding level using your signature move and for your Reishi technique 2 decreases. Now that we've broken all that down, let me explain what all of that really means. Saleyaporro's battle data is very complex, but breaking it down in a simplified manner, essentially you are going to need a spirit bug placed. Now, even if you don't retrieve the bug, you can still accumulate your spiritual pressure understanding level. What you do here is that you can either retrieve it using your signature move, or as long as you've planted your bug, you can then increase your spiritual understanding through your spiritual technique 2. Of course, in order to use the spiritual pressure technique, you'll need to have spiritual power, which means you'll need to do some damage. Of course, since at the start of a battle, you don't have spiritual power, you'll need to either use your reverse gauge to accumulate it, or you'll need to do some combos. Essentially what this is saying is that by using your counter and then placing a bug, you will then be able to use your signature move or use your spiritual technique 2 to raise your understanding. As you raise your understanding, you'll be able to reduce the damage that your opponent is doing to you. The more bugs you have placed, the further along in your analysis progress you will be in. And the further along in your progress you are, the less bugs will be required to finish analyzing your opponent and overcoming the battle. As your levels increase for your spiritual power understanding, you'll be able to reduce your damage even further. In short, understand that your spiritual pressure understanding level is a buff. It reduces your damage. The gauge does not appear to disappear as your understanding of the enemy remains. You can only raise your level through spiritual bugs or your spiritual technique 2, and it appears that you'll need a certain amount of bugs to raise the gauge another level. Upon awakening, you have the probability of different Kikon move damage, along with reviving up to 2 times. In order to raise your understanding level, in one way or another, you're going to need bugs on you. How many? We still don't know, but I'm going to give you a quick formula that we can kind of use as a basis. Depending on how many insects are retrieved, the analysis stage and the understanding level will gain a corresponding ability. So in essence, the more bugs you place, the more your gauge can raise, and as well how much your ability improves. Your spiritual understanding is basically a buff to negate damage. It's my understanding that you start off at your level at 0, and once you've obtained enough spirit bugs on your enemy, you'll be able to retrieve them and get to level 1. You'll do the same thing for level 2 and level 3. Because you start off with less souls at the beginning of a fight, you're likely going to have about 6 Kompaku, maybe even 5, maybe even up to 7 or 8, but you won't have 9 like everybody else. As I explained in my roster prediction, and side note, someone even said it themselves, your boy Loki predicted Saleyaporro's kit, so give your boy some flowers here. It's insane, when we look at it, he really is based on the aspect of he counters and baits them, like I was mentioning with Renji, and where he baited him and then styled on him real quick. He's basically, in a sense, doing that same thing to the opponent. He is studying them, styling on them, and then getting that spirit bug off, and then basically acting like, hey, you're in my lab. I'm going to basically treat you like my little research puppet. And so his spiritual technique 1 allows him to bait somebody into getting a counter off, and then also planting that chronicle bug. Two things I can think about here is, obviously, if you know that your opponent is being very offensive, you can take advantage and just pop off your counter, or you can bait them into it by holding your guard. If you know they're going to hit your guard trying to break it, you can just immediately pop your counter, and boom, now you've planted a bug. So, this is kind of one of those characters where even the enemy can't be too careful in knowing when to strike at you, because if they make the wrong move at you, it may come back and bite them in the butt. They're going to try to overwhelm you at first, but you can use that to your advantage. If they're overly aggressive at the very beginning, that might help you pop off your counters. And if they're more neutral, you might be able to close in the gap, do some damage, and kind of try to suss them out through battle. That way you can gain some spiritual power and potentially raise your understanding level. The part that I'm still questioning here is, can you raise your understanding level without your bugs using your spiritual technique 2? There's a part of it that is very nuanced, and you have to kind of explain it for yourself. From what I can understand, it says the analysis stage affects your spiritual technique 2. What I'm wondering is does that mean that you can use your spiritual technique 2 without any bugs placed? That's really the big question I'm having here. Without official translations, it's more so speculation, but it's really going to be one of two ways: whether you do need bugs and there's going to be a certain volume of bugs that you'll need depending on the stage of analysis, or this is kind of a cheat and where you won't have to have the bugs if you've already done the fight and then the analysis through your spiritual technique 2. We will find out soon, though. He did end up becoming the character I kind of imagined. I couldn't really put it into words, and I did not think that they would use the probability archetype to describe him and to make him. But all in all, he's got his fraction, he's got his sonido flair, and yeah, I mean, he is at the end of the day doing a voodoo doll. There is some speculation on whether or not this voodoo doll is a special Kikon move, or if it is basically that everyone's going to have a specific doll. I'm leaning on the latter, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Saleyaporro has about 3 extra gauges, so it does make him a little bit more difficult, since you have to kind of understand what those gauges do as well, and then also manage them as well. Your Reishi reveal level seems to be your probability meter. Your spiritual level should be at 0 at the start of a match, and then you should be able to level it up to 1, 2, and 3 is my educated assumption. At base level, level 0, you'd have no damage reduction, no revivals allowed, and Kikon damage is 3 at base, 4 in evolution. But once you get to your spiritual understanding level 1, you have likely 20% damage reduction, 1 revival active, and your Kikon move is likely to work on a 75 to 25 basis, where it's more likely to do low amounts of damage than it is to do high amounts of damage, but you still have the ability or probability of being able to land a heavy damage. Now, as you go into your level 2, things start to increase slightly, so you'll get to 30% damage reduction, 1 revival still, and it will be at about a half, and half, so everything is pretty much equal when it comes to your Kikon move damage. So maybe it could be a 4, could be a 5, could be a 6, it's anyone's guess. And at level 3, You now are able to reduce the damage 50%, and you get 2 revivals, and then your key cone damage could be a 5, it could be a 6. It's anyone's guess. And so that's basically how I'm understanding that the probability is going to come into effect for the levels. It's going to basically vary depending on where you're at in the ratio reveal level, and then also depend on which level you're at for the understanding gauge. There's a lot going on here, but a basic tactic I've thought about for Saleyaporro is either baiting your opponent into being aggressive or just beating their ass, essentially. You really gotta fight them. If you just accumulate your spiritual power, I'm thinking you should be able to do your spiritual technique too, as a way of kind of overriding the condition of having a spiritual bug. I'm really thinking it's gonna either be that you don't have to have it, or you have to have it planted, but you don't have to have it retrieved. The nuance here is that you can plant it and still not have it retrieved. And so as long as you plant the bug, you can then analyze it while you're doing your spiritual technique too. It's still speculation because of the specific wording and the unofficial translations. I don't want to say for sure it's that, but I'm really leaning on the fact that you can plant it, you don't have to retrieve it, you can retrieve it, does damage, and raises your spiritual understanding level. Saleyaporro is pretty cool. I actually really like the way that they've made him. I think he's very unique in that he offers a good amount of versatility. There's different ways to play him. He is a more intellectual character than most, but if you really understand things of this nature like probability and what you need to take advantage, his disadvantage turns into an advantage if you get him right. And honestly, although I didn't think I'd like to use him, I'm actually very curious about how he plays, and I'm definitely going to give him a shot. Let me know what you think about Saleyaporro down in the comments below, but if this has helped you, please like, comment, and subscribe. This has been your boy Saint Irving, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.